Hey there, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. It's great to have you with us again as we continue this journey together, exploring some really fascinating source material.
Absolutely. It feels like we're really getting into a rhythm here.
Yeah, think of this as us digging up the essential nuggets of knowledge, connecting the dots, and maybe uncovering a few surprises.
We appreciate you joining us on this ongoing exploration. Each deep dive, it kind of stands on its own, but when you see them together, they really start to build a larger picture.
Totally.
So if you're just jumping in here, feel free to catch up on our previous dives into this source material. It definitely helps get the full context.
Good point. Today we're diving into excerpts from a project called The Vindication of the King. It's essentially a podcast script that takes a really close look at the book of Samuel.
And specifically, the material we've got focuses on commentary by Ariel Louis. Now, the source tells us this commentary is inspired by his late father, Rabbi David Louis. And it's presented as this artistic and spiritually guided approach to these ancient texts. It's described as a collaboration between Ariel and his son, Yehuda Louis.
Right.
And their aim, according to the source, is to find revolutionary insights relevant for our times.
So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack a really pivotal moment presented in this material, chapter 16 of 1 Samuel. We're going to follow the narrative, Saul's rejection, David's selection, but guided by this specific commentary to understand the insights offered on things like leadership, prophecy, and inner transformation.
And the source does remind us that the chapters leading up to this point in the Vindication of the King covered Samuel's rise, those power struggles, the whole division regarding the role of prophecy.
Right, setting the stage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So chapter 16, as it's presented here, marks a pretty dramatic turning point in the story of Israelite leadership.
Okay, let's jump into it then. The chapter opens with a really direct command from God to Samuel. Saul's reign has, effectively ended because of his failures.
Yeah, it's stirred.
And God tells Samuel, right in verse 1, basically, stop mourning Saul because I have rejected him from being king over Israel.
That's a powerful opening. And Lewis's commentary, as our source material presents it, really emphasizes the finality there.
How so?
Well, it highlights that without repentance, Saul gets no second chance for his actions. The rejection isn't just like a divine whim. It's presented as a consequence tied directly to Saul's unaddressed spiritual state.
Ah, okay. So it underscores that failure, if you don't turn back from it, it has lasting consequences, at least in this narrative.
Definitely. And right after that, God immediately gives Samuel a totally new directive.
Yeah. Fill your horn with oil, go to Jesse in Bethlehem, because God says, I have provided me a king among his sons.
But Samuel's hesitant, right? Which is understandable. He says, how can I go? If Saul hears it, he'll kill me.
Yeah, it's a legitimate fear.
It is. And this is where God gives him this very specific, almost step-by-step plan. Like, take a heifer with you, say you've come to sacrifice to the Lord, call Jesse to the sacrifice.
And this is where Lewis's commentary offers a really interesting observation, drawn from the source text.
What's that?
He notes that God provides specific instructions this time, which is apparently in contrast to Saul's earlier appointment, where Samuel seemed to handle things with maybe more autonomy.
Yes, exactly. It's presented as a key detail, maybe implying a lesson learned from that previous mission.
Today,
suggesting that for this really crucial next step, Samuel needed clearer, divine guidance to avoid repeating past errors in judgment.
Makes sense. Okay, let's follow Samuel to Bethlehem. He arrives, and the town elders, they're trembling, clearly nervous about a prophet just showing up.
Yeah, you can imagine. They ask, do you come peaceably?
He assures them, yeah, it's for a sacrifice, and he calls Jesse and his sons to participate.
And then comes the moment of selection. So Jesse's sons start passing before Samuel. The eldest, Eliab, steps forward.
Right.
And the text tells us Samuel sees him and immediately thinks, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. I mean, he's tall, impressive.
He looks like a king.
He looks the part. But then comes that famous correction in verse 7. God steps in right away.
Look not on his countenance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him.
For it is not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart.
That principle is so central to this whole story.
Absolutely. And the commentary connects this moment back to the beginning of the story in a really powerful way. Louis suggests that Samuel might have made a critical error before when selecting Saul.
How so?
By mistakenly choosing him because of his impressive stature, maybe overlooking someone else God intended, someone described as a wise and humble servant.
Wow. Okay, so this isn't just a lesson for Samuel now. The commentary presents it as a divine correction of a past mistake.
Exactly.
It implies that the very reason Saul was chosen initially, his appearance, was the wrong yardstick, the opposite of what God values in leadership, according to this interpretation.
Precisely. The source frames this as a fundamental teaching moment, even for the prophet himself, about the true nature of kingship in God's eyes.
Okay, so Jesse keeps bringing his sons forward. 7 of them pass before Samuel.
And God confirms, nope, none of these are the one.
Samuel must be thinking, what's going on? He asks Jesse, are here all thy children?
And Jesse's like, well, there's still the youngest. He's out keeping the sheep. Kind of an afterthought almost.
But Samuel is insistent. He says, send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither.
Right. The prophet knows the chosen one hasn't shown up yet, and he's not moving forward until he does.
So David is brought in, and the text gives us this description. He was ruddy and with all of beautiful eyes and goodly to look upon. Young, a shepherd, definitely not the expected figure like his older brothers.
And the commentary shared in the source material includes a really interesting personal reaction from Ariel Louis here.
Oh, yeah.
It notes that, quote, when looking deep, he was amazed by the great soul of David. He was ruddy and with all of beautiful eyes and goodly to look upon, and he praised the Lord for this perfect man.
Huh. That adds a different layer.
It does. It sort of highlights that artistic and spiritually guided approach the source mentions, focusing on the inner essence being reflected maybe in the outer description.
That's a beautiful way to look at it. And then finally, the divine confirmation comes. Arise, anoint him, for this is he.
So Samuel takes the oil, anoints David in the midst of his brethren, right there with his brothers watching.
Must have been quite a moment.
You'd think so. And the source points out a pivotal consequence. The Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. Mission accomplished, Samuel leaves for Ramah.
Now the story takes a sharp turn. Almost immediately, verse 14 tells us, now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul.
And this is where the commentary offers a really, I think, compelling interpretation of that evil spirit that starts tormenting Saul.
Right. What does Louis suggest here?
Based on the source's presentation, he suggests it wasn't necessarily some external demon, but rather the profound void created by the absence of the Spirit of the Lord.
So his torment was the result of losing that divine connection, like a spiritual vacuum manifesting inside him.
Yes, that's the perspective offered in the source. The commentary describes Saul's inner state as this intense conflict. His former gift of prophecy and his fatalistic convictions warred within him.
So the loss of that prophetic ability he once had just added to the turmoil.
Exactly. It compounded it. And the source explains that this kind of internal suffering was often described, in the language and understanding of that time as being possessed of an evil spirit.
That paints a picture of a soul in really deep distress, just wrestling with loss and internal contradiction.
Mm-hmm. And what's particularly poignant is how the commentary connects this torment directly to David. Louis describes it as a colossal battle of love and hate, which he experienced regarding David.
Love and hate.
Yeah. David was the singer who was both the only one who soothed his tortured soul and also, as his replacement king, the very one who inflamed his agonizing rage.
Wow. So David, just by being there, was, in one moment, both his only beloved friend and his greatest enemy.
That's how the source's interpretation puts it. A profound psychological tension.
It really emphasizes the complex tragedy of Saul's situation.
It does. And amidst all this torment, Saul's servant, Doeg the Edomite, speaks up in verse 15. He attributes the trouble to an evil spirit from God, Elohim himself terrifieth thee.
Okay, blaming God directly.
Right. And the commentary presents a strong counter-argument to Doeg's words. It suggests that listening to Doeg actually worsens Saul's condition.
Oh.
Because it reinforced what Louis identifies as Saul's catastrophic, fatalistic thorn in his side, this false belief that evil is in and from God.
So this reading implies Doeg's theology was actually harmful. It fed into Saul's sense of doom, making it harder for him to seek repentance or change.
That seems to be the interpretation offered, especially since the source earlier noted that repentance was precisely what Saul lacked.
So Doeg's words, maybe without meaning to, were like adding fuel to the fire, confirming Saul's deepest, most damaging conviction about his fate.
Yeah. The source even notes the commentary's sharp take that Doeg's suggestion to find a harp player might have been made, quote, desiring to crush Saul's spirit completely.
That's a harsh judgment on Doeg's motives, suggesting he might have been manipulating Saul's vulnerability.
It is. And the commentary adds another layer to Saul's feelings for David even before he knew David was anointed.
What's that?
It suggests that in his remnant prophetic ability, Saul somehow sensed it and envisioned David as enemy and usurper, while at the very same time finding immense comfort and, quote, love for David as mental reliever of his mental anguish.
So his lingering prophetic sense was battling the solace David provided? That's incredibly complex.
It really is. So Saul asks his servants to find a skilled musician, and the source quotes the commentary suggesting Saul might have been thinking, maybe I can prophesy again.
Trying to get back that connection.
But his desire for prophecy, while yet ignoring repentance, is presented as putting him in this impossible position of not wanting that which he desired. He longed for the spiritual connection but wasn't willing to do the work to address the root cause of why it left.
Okay. Then a young man recommends David, and he lists all these qualities.
Right. Skilled musician, capable warrior, prudent, handsome.
And crucially, the Lord is with him.
That last part must have really hit home for Saul, given his own situation.
You'd think so. Saul sends for David. Jesse sends gifts, along with him bread, wine, a kid. David comes to Saul's court.
And the text says Saul loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. There's an immediate connection, it seems.
Mm-hmm. And the effect of David's music is immediate, too, as verse 23 describes. When the Spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took the harp and played with his hand, so Saul found relief, and it was well with him, and the evil spirit departed from him.
So David's music brought Saul temporary peace, relief.
But the commentary concludes this section with one final telling observation.
Yeah.
It says, whenever deep meditation in David's music re-evoked his prophetic intuition that David was his worst foe, his complex anxiety resurfaced.
So the relief was real, but it was fragile. It was constantly being undermined by Saul's underlying spiritual void and that intuitive dread of David as the one who would replace him.
The friend who was also the usurper in his mind.
Exactly. A constant internal battle.
Okay, let's try and pull together the key threads we found in this section of the source material. We definitely saw that clear contrast highlighted between God's criteria for leadership looking at the heart versus human judgment based on outward appearance.
Right, presented almost as a correction of that past mistake with Saul.
We also saw the consequence of unrepented failure leading to rejection. Pretty stark.
And we got that really unique perspective on Saul's torment offered by Lewis's commentary, seeing it not just as an external evil spirit, but as the void left by the departing divine presence, which then fueled all that internal conflict and was reinforced by those fatalistic beliefs.
Yeah, that was fascinating. And finally, that deep paradox of David's presence in Saul's life being a source of temporary healing that, at the same time, triggered his deepest fears and anxieties.
The source material mentions, drawing insights relevant for our own times. And this deep dive into chapter 16, it certainly makes you reflect, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, how much do we still rely on outward appearance when we're judging leadership or even just people in our daily lives, compared to looking at inner character?
That's a really good question.
And how do we understand intense internal struggles today, what might have been called evil spirits in ancient texts? How do we think about those things through a modern lens?
It really makes you consider that fundamental distinction the source highlights. What man sees versus what, according to this text, the divine sees. How much of our own decision-making, personal and public, is still swayed by that outward appearance that the source suggests isn't the primary criterion. It's definitely something worth mulling over.
And it's good to remember this is just one chapter we've looked at today within that larger exploration of Samuel presented in the Vindication of the King series. There's clearly much more to explore in this journey through prophetic wisdom, according to the source.
Absolutely. Well, we hope this deep dive into chapter 16 brought some valuable new perspectives for you listening. We really do love hearing your thoughts and feedback on these explorations.
Yeah, definitely.
So please consider subscribing if you haven't. Maybe hit that notification bell and leave us a comment. It really helps us know what resonates with you.
Thanks so much for joining us. We look forward to continuing the journey with you next time.